We're in a series through the Gospel of John, and those are just some highlights from John chapter 1, which is the introduction to John's story about Jesus. And those themes are carried on throughout the whole book. So we're just going to remind ourselves of those things each week before we dive into whatever chapter we're in. This season of Advent, usually there's a particular Advent kind of sermon series, and we talk about Jesus. But we're going through John, and we're going to be in it a while. We're only in chapter 6 this week, so we're carrying through. But we'll see the ways that the hopes of Advent are present even as we go through the book of John. This week is the theme of hope. Each week of Advent, there's a different theme that highlights what Jesus brings to the world, the gift that he is to the world. And so hope, peace, joy, and love. This week it's hope. And hope is something that, if we're honest, as we think about, is sometimes difficult for us, especially as you live your life, and over time, hope sometimes becomes even more difficult. You get jaded or hurt. The world just seems to get crazier and crazier, and hope becomes more and more elusive and difficult, something you have to fight for. And we're looking at this idea of hope that Jesus brings us and daring to hope. But we're going to look at some of the obstacles that keep us, that prevent us sometimes from fully embracing the hope that's in Jesus. Last week I told you a story of when I walked on wet cement and sunk down, and it was very disorienting to put your full weight on a sidewalk and to sink down into it. Similarly, there's this sense of with hope, even with Jesus, where we might be hesitant to put our full weight on him. We're going to be talking about fully embracing Jesus, because that's what hope is to fully embrace something that you're wanting and hoping that comes to pass. So what does it look like to fully embrace Jesus? But first we got to look at the obstacles that prevent us or make that difficult for us. This last Sunday evening, my family and I, Megan, myself, and the girls were decorating for Christmas. Yes, it was before Thanksgiving. Some of you are sticklers about that and are judging me, and I don't care. We needed to do it. We were going to spend Thanksgiving in Indiana with Megan's family, and I didn't want to come home and do it this weekend, so we did it last weekend. And as we were, getting the Christmas tree out, I realized the stand was broken. I had to go in my shop, and cut some wood, which I did, and didn't cut any fingers off. I got some duct tape and just wrapped it around. I made a base, and it works so far. But so we did all that, got the tree up, got some decorations out, put some lights up, and we were ready to put ornaments on the tree. So we had all the ornaments out. Megan and I do the breakable ones and try and do those quick before the girls can get to it. We got to put it higher on the tree so Rosa or Ginger, our cat, doesn't get to it. So we did the breakable ones, and then there's the ones that the girls can just put wherever. And, later, once they're in bed, we rearrange them so it looks a little nicer. So we're doing all that, and the girls are having fun. Like, oh yeah, and like, I forgot about this ornament. It is just so much fun. And we have some fun ornaments, and I'll show you a picture of one that we have. This is like a little gnome. I don't know where we got it. Megan, she's helping with the preschool class down there. She could tell you who bought that for us, why we have it. Those things just slip out of my mind. I have no idea. But we have this fun little gnome. And there's just a great moment. It was just one of those small, just like things that happen in life, but just hit us in the right moment where we were just busting out laughing. Because Rosa, she grabbed that gnome, and here's a little picture of her, and she held it upside down. And she comes up to Megan and I and says, "Look, it's a cucumber woman." And, when you squint and look at it upside down, like, oh yeah, maybe it is the cucumber woman. And for now on, every time we look at that gnome, we're going to think not little Christmas gnome, but that's a cucumber woman. So we now put it upside down on our tree, the cucumber woman. Kids make like really funny misunderstandings, or like you think you're in a conversation, you think you're together, and then all of a sudden they say something, you're like, okay, we're on different planes of understanding, like you see the world differently. I never would have looked at that and thought, a cucumber woman. But Rosa's more imaginative than I am. Misunderstandings are super cute when kids do it. But one of the themes of the Gospel of John, and it's not quite as cute as Rosa is people misunderstanding Jesus. And you see it in John's Gospel, more than the other three Gospels have recorded accounts of conversations that Jesus has with people. And every time you're just like, wow, Jesus, you're just on a different level than the people he's talking to, and even us as we're reading it. And it's full of misunderstandings that people have of the things Jesus is saying. But so often those misunderstandings, once they come to the surface, lead into Jesus revealing a depth of who he is that is just like remarkable. And so that's a theme all through the Gospel of John. You see even in the introduction that John gives, before he starts talking about the story of Jesus, he says this in John 1:10 through 12. Talking about Jesus. He's introducing who he is. And he says this, he was in the world, and though the world was made through him, through Jesus, the world did not recognize him. They didn't recognize their creator. Jesus came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet, to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. And what you see in all the interactions that Jesus has with people in the Gospel of John, it begins with misunderstanding about people not recognizing him or receiving him. But there's a number of stories where people push through their misunderstanding, they stay engaged with Jesus, and they eventually come to belief. And as they come to belief, Jesus gives them the gift of becoming children of God. So we see that, and it's on display more than I think maybe any other chapter in John chapter 6. So we're going to track through the misunderstandings people have of Jesus in John chapter 6. And the way we're going to track through this, I'm going to call these misunderstanding obstacles. These are obstacles that people have to fully embracing Jesus. And I'm highlighting these because I think they're also obstacles that we struggle with. I think John is very clear as he's writing out this story and the many others. It's not just because he's like, hey, I want to tell you about Jesus' encounters with people back then. But he knows that we need to hear these encounters because they're encounters we have as well. So these are obstacles, and here's 6 obstacles that we see in John's Gospel in chapter 6 that prevent people from fully embracing Jesus. That's doubt, our need for control, our crippling fear, being entrenched or held back by the past, our cynicism, and it just being too hard to follow. I think these are 6 obstacles we'll see. But as we'll dive through each of those, but first I want to tell you about the beginning of John chapter 6, which is the first Thanksgiving story. I know you may think it was, the Native Americans and the Pilgrims, Plymouth Rock or whatever that story is. That's not the first Thanksgiving. The original we find in John chapter 6. And some of you, I think many of you will find it familiar. John chapter 6, it begins in verse 1. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. Verse 4, the Jewish Passover festival was near. So this is the setting of John chapter 6. There's a big crowd of people following Jesus. And this massive crowd of people go with him up on a mountainside. And we hear this detail that John gives us. And John doesn't give us details just, for the heck of it. It's intentional. He wants us to pay attention. So he says, the Jewish Passover festival was near. There's 3 times in John's gospel, as he's tracking through Jesus' ministry, where it mentions the Passover festival. The first was in John chapter 2 when Jesus cleared the temple. He busted in there, flipped over tables. It was epic. Everyone scattered out. And he was sending a message communicating to the way in which you are purified is not going to be from all these sacrifices. They're a precursor to me. And Jesus says, I am the new temple. I am the one who will purify you, who will deliver you from from the things that keep you from God. That was the first Passover festival in the clearing of the temple. This story is the second one, and the third one points to Jesus' death. In John's gospel, this might bother some people, but he messes with the timeline of Jesus' death, and he has Jesus die on a different day than everyone else. And why? It's not because John didn't know that, because he instead has Jesus die on the time of the Passover sacrifices. Because John wants to make it really clear to people that Jesus' death is the new Passover, it's the new deliverance, it's the new salvation. So we have these 2 stories, and then we get John chapter 6, and as we go through it, you'll realize why I'm emphasizing it's Passover. This is important detail in what Passover means. Okay, let's dive into it. That's the setting. We get the first obstacle, the obstacle of doubt. Verse 5, when Jesus looked up, he saw a great crowd coming toward him. He said to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? He asked this only to test him. Very sneaky, Jesus. He asked him only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, it would take more than half a year's wage to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many? Stressful situation. Think about 5,000 people showing up to your house right at mealtime. They haven't eaten for like a day. It's like, okay, are you cool, calm, collected? Be like, all right, don't worry. God's got this, we'll be good. No, Jesus puts it on them too. Like, he's like, hey, how are we going to feed these people? They're like, you're asking us? Why would you put us in this situation? And, Philip, I love Philip. We talked about doubting Thomas, but like Philip's like, he's right there with them. And understandably so, I very much relate to Philip. He's like, Jesus, in case you didn't realize or do the math here, half a year's wage would barely be enough to feed these people. We find out later there's 5,000 plus people in this crowd. So Philip's like, this is an impossible situation. Andrew, maybe a little better. He offers something. He's like, well, we've got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish from this kid here. We could steal his lunch, but that's not going to feed 5,000 people. They're met with an impossible situation. And I think many of us, as we think through our lives, there's times where, you're in a situation where you're like, I don't know how we're going to get through this. It's just, and the anxiety, stress hormones start going through you. You're just like, we're done. We're like, there's no way we can get through this. I feel those maybe often, if I'll admit it, where I'm just like, we're done. There's no way we can get through this. I don't know how to do it. I remember Megan and I's first year of marriage. We had moved to Kansas City, just moved there, just got married, and we had gone out for seminary. I took a year gap between school, but we went out there, and one morning we woke up very early in the morning to a phone call from Megan's dad, who the car that Megan drove was in his name, saying, hey, can you look outside the window? I think the car got stolen. The police just called me. I'm like, oh, okay, 2 a.m. That's a fun phone call. So we look out, and sure enough, the car's gone. Megan's car got stolen. And so we went through all of that. Ended up getting totaled, crashed against some tree. And then 2 days later, so we're down to one car, my car. 2 days later, my car's engine died. Just totally went out. And let me tell you, that car was not worth an engine replacement. You've been in those situations. And so then we were down to zero. And we were very grateful to have an aunt and uncle who lived in town who let us borrow their van. So we drove that for a while. But we were like, we do not know what to do. Megan, right in that time, got a new job. So she had a part-time job and then got a full-time job. And we're like, okay, maybe we can afford a car payment. So we went for it and bought a car. And so we had a car. And so for quite a while, we just did one car. But I was getting ready to start seminary. And the school that I was going to was across the state line. We live in Kansas City. Just the state line goes right through the city. So we lived on the Kansas side, but the school's on the Missouri side. And I'm like, when I'm in a situation like this, my mind just does not stop. And I'm just like, if I just think about it more, then surely, the light bulb will pop, and I'll be able to, figure all of this out. So I'm just, constantly just okay, how can we find, and my mind wasn't coming up with anything. Yes, my impulse, honestly, was not to pray. I'm learning, okay? But it was just I'm just so stressed out about this. And I'm worried because once school starts and we can't do one car. We have to have another car. We can't go to the jobs that we both have and I go to school. And so finally, after quite a while, I'm like, okay, I did one of those prayers where I'm like, God, I am doing this. I'm going to seminary for you. I came out here for you. Our car got stolen. My engine died. Do something, okay? I cannot feed the 5,000 people, okay? And we just kind of left it at that and we're just hoping something will happen. And one day I was at work and I got a phone call from this guy from this church that we had just started going to. And he called and he was like, hey, I just heard through the grapevine from some people that you had a tough situation. We have a car. It's older than you are, but it works. Do you want it for $1? And I told him, I have $1. I do want it for $1. But that taught me something that I continually need God to remind me of. Hey, just because it seems insurmountable to you, it's not insurmountable to me. It was one of many lessons of learning to trust in the midst of my doubt. There may be a number of doubts you wrestle with. Doubts related to God, to faith, to situations. God does not send us away hey, I can't handle your doubts. Get out of here. He engages. He invites it. He actually brings it out into the open. He intentionally, it says, to test. He's like, hey, I need to know, I need you to speak to the fact that you're doubting that we can get out of this situation because we need engagement. And I love how Andrew is okay, this is what we've got. And that's so often what God just wants from us in the midst of our doubts. Is I don't know, God. I'm really hesitant to really hope in you, to fully embrace you. But we've got this kid's lunch. I don't know. Maybe you can do something with that. And Jesus does. He has the people sit down, and then he does this. He takes the loaves, and he gives thanks. That's the Thanksgiving. Okay, enough of the connection to Thanksgiving. But he gives thanks, and then he distributes it, and he starts having it passed out. And he does the same with the fish. And then it just keeps going. It says, all had enough to eat. And it's even overflowing. They have 12 basketfuls left over. So often our doubts keep us from fully embracing, from fully hoping. And Jesus says, hey, I know you have those. I want to hear them. Engage with me. Give me what you got. And just try, fight for that trust in me. Okay, so that's the base story of all of John 6. And we're going to move a little faster through these other ones. We see the response, and it brings up the second obstacle. That's that of control. In verse 14, after the people saw the sign that Jesus performed, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. So the people's response, they got their bellies full. I'm sure that bread and fish was yummy. They had a full meal, and they're like, hey, the Romans, they have beaten us down. We're under their yoke, but this dude can make bread and fish just multiply. Let's put this guy on top. We're ready to do this. So Jesus saw into their hearts, maybe, and just knowing or hearing the rumblings that people were considering, and Jesus is like, no. Because Jesus come to do something that's, he's bringing about deliverance in a different way than the people expect. And he's not going to let them control what he is going to be about and how he's going to do it. And so often I think about even just like the situation, the stressful situations we're in, we so often cling to ways where we can be in the driver's seat. Even around things of God, we might want to have some measure of control. And Jesus resists that every time. We don't want to put ourselves, church, in situations or set things up in a way where we're trying to control Jesus. We can't market him. We don't need to sell him. We can't shape Jesus into our own image, because otherwise, as in this story, Jesus will withdraw. He's like, no. He refuses to be controlled. We have to meet Jesus on Jesus' terms. And even these people who are ready to, hey, we're going to set you up as king. It's a good thing. King Jesus, we sing about that. He is presented as the King of Kings, but not in a way where we control him. Jesus is going to resist that every single time in our own lives, but also in our church's life. It's not through our coercion or manipulation, but a full embrace of Jesus requires surrendering to him. We want control, but the way of Jesus to fully come to him is surrender. And yes, that is hard. But that's the only way we can fully get Jesus, is through surrender. So the story continues on. And Jesus, he withdraws. His disciples, they go out onto the sea, in the Sea of Galilee. And they go ahead of him. They're in the boat. As they're out there, there's a big storm, there's waves, and then Jesus decides to catch up. And so he comes out on the stormy waters, and it says this, they see Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. Understandably so. Okay, there's a guy walking on water in the midst of a storm, but they were frightened. But Jesus said to them, it is I, don't be afraid. Then they were willing to take him into the boat. They take him in, the wind, the storm subsides, and they get to the other side. In John's gospel, the walking on water story is almost kind of like an aside. Like the focus is the feeding of the 5,000, and then it's almost like, oh yeah, and Jesus walked on water. They were afraid, and he told them not to. And then we go on, and it kind of continues on talking about the feeding of the 5,000 story, which is kind of funny because I feel like it's kind of a big deal. But John highlights here again a misunderstanding that people have, even in his own disciples, of who Jesus is. And immediately they see him and they're afraid. They've seen him just feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. But yet they're still full of fear. Fear of situations, the storm. Fear of, okay, who is this guy really? Who is this guy really? They're afraid. But Jesus says to them the most common command in all the scriptures. If you were to look through your Bible and go through the whole thing and see, what does Jesus tell people, command people to do most often? More than anything, it's, some of you got it, do not be afraid. Maybe there's something there. Maybe there's a reason that God has to say it to us so many times. Because our fear keeps us. It keeps us from a lot. From embracing what John talks about, the full, abundant life that's in him. From fully embracing, because hope is hard, it's risky. Do not be afraid. Let that just be seared into your soul. Hear the Lord saying that personally to you. Do not be afraid. So it goes on. Jesus gets to the other side. The people are like, whoa, how did Jesus get there? Because we saw the disciples leave, but Jesus didn't go with them. And okay, I don't know what's going on, but we're going to follow you. And they start talking, Jesus and this crowd of people who are gathered around him. And they're asking these questions. They're going back and forth. And then in the midst of their conversation, here's kind of the highlight point of their conversation. And in verse 30, so they asked him, what sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Which, by the way, he just fed 5,000 people and walked on water. Okay, just have to say it. Defend my boy Jesus, okay? Come on, people. Okay, then they go on. Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written. He gave them bread from heaven to eat. So they're ready to make him king, but hey, this feeding of the 5,000, it's reminding us of kind of what Moses did and, with the manna. And so tell us more about that. Let's see some more. Are you really, are you the one? So they asked him about this. Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, it's not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it's my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, always give us this bread. They're like, wow, what is Jesus' manna going to taste like? Verse 35, then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But as I told you, you have seen me, and still you do not believe. Later on, it says that the people's response to this is they start grumbling. They don't like Jesus' response. And it reveals to us this fourth obstacle that people sometimes have, them and us, in fully embracing Jesus. In the Exodus story where they're out in the desert, they'd just been delivered from Egypt. The Passover has happened where they're delivered and they go out into the desert. And when they're in the desert, they start, the way the scriptures describe it, they start grumbling. They start grumbling against God, against Moses. They're like, hey, you brought us out in this desert to die. And they start saying this to Moses. They're like, we had it so much better in Egypt. We sat around the campfire and had just pots of meat. And you read that and it's ironic, it's funny because you're like, weren't you enslaved in Egypt and crying out for deliverance? Remember all of that we went through? But no, they just look back and man, we had it so much better back then. And these people who are coming to Jesus, they're just so reminiscent because it's a repeated thing. I think the obstacle that they have here is, I want to say entrenched in the past, but not in the way that the past is negative. Because Jesus points back to the past and he draws from it. It's not that the past is like bad and like, okay, you just got to move on. It's not that. But they look back to the past, to the stories of God providing, the story of the manna and the desert and all that. And they're like, Jesus, hey, God did that then, so what are you going to do now? It was so intense, so amazing then. Like, what's the bread that you have for us? And they don't like Jesus' answer. Because Jesus' answer is like, hey, it's more than just the bread I gave you that's filling your belly right now. That is not going to satisfy you. Instead, he says, I am the bread of life. I'm the bread that's going to come from. It's not going to be the manna that I provide you. It's in myself. I'm going to be the deliverance. And they don't like that. And I think for us, we have the tendency to do a few things as we think about the past. We have a tendency to victimize our past. Of maybe just like, we've just been beaten down. And that's not passing over real hurt. I don't say that to pass over the real hurt that you experienced in your life. But when we solely look through the lens of we are the victim, and it's just been hurt after hurt after hurt against us, we miss what God wants to do in the midst of our hurts. Okay, so victimizing our past. We have the tendency to glorify our past. I think about the Israelites who are like, man, we had it so good in Egypt. And it's like, okay. We think about the form and method, just like the people, the crowd who are there with Jesus. Hey, remember how like there was manna, there was this bread that was rained down from heaven? What if you did it like that, Jesus? Do that again. That would be a sign. And Jesus is like, hey, I'm doing a new thing. And if you're just so committed to the form of how God worked in the past, you're going to miss what I'm doing in the future. We can glorify our past. We repeat our past. Maybe the things we should learn from, but we don't, and we repeat it. Or I think what Jesus wants us to hear in this and leads us to fully embracing Jesus is that we identify God's presence in our past. If the Israelites, if the people who are gathering around Jesus would have looked and say, what I see in that story from our history is that in a really tough situation where we're about to die in the desert, God showed up. I see God's presence. And maybe God's presence is in this guy, Jesus, who's showing up. And he's doing it in a new way and doing new things, and I don't want to miss that. But I see God's presence back then. I want to look for it today. That's, I think, how Jesus wants us to look at our past. See God's presence. Yeah, there's hurt. Yeah, there's disappointment. There's regret. But what has God done? How has his faithful showed up then? And what is he going to do today? Okay, I got to move faster. Cynicism. We see this after Jesus talks about being the bread of life. In verse 41, the Jews there begin to grumble against him because it said, I'm the bread that came down from heaven. They said, is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he now say, I came down from heaven? They get cynical because they're familiar with Jesus. They're like, we know your mama and papa. Like, no way you can say that you're the bread of life that's come down from heaven. And sometimes, too, in our familiarity with maybe the things around Jesus, church, I think I'll say this, as someone who's a pastor, who's very much on like the behind the scenes of church stuff, or maybe if you've been a leader or are a leader in the church and you know what like all the work that goes on behind the scenes and maybe sometimes like the drama behind the scenes. Maybe you've been in situations where you've seen people in positions who are leaders of like faith groups or of churches maybe who have failed you, who have messed up. And it's so easy for cynicism to set in, understandably so. That's how cynicism is developed. When you're so familiar with something and you put your hope in it and then you're disappointed. And that's real. And so these people, they have this familiarity with Jesus and they're like, there's no way you can make that claim. They've been hurt before probably, and they're like, I'm just not willing to trust. That's hard for us. Cynicism keeps us from fully embracing Jesus. And that's not to pass over people who have messed up. Absolutely not. People need to be held accountable. But I can say, as someone who's a leader in church, just even doing the church work, it's easy to over time get cynical and lose sight of the why. Why are we doing all this? Why do I have to do all this work? What's the point of all this? Another fall fest, another, it's easy to lose sight of the why behind the things we do. And even, preparing a sermon, okay, got to do the thing, prepare the sermon. It's just, as you get familiar, it's easy to just kind of settle in. But when we're faithful to try and turn our hearts and open it up to risk, I think here's the thing. Cynicism is a self-protection thing that we do from past hurts. But to connect with God, to fully embrace him, we have to be vulnerable. That's like the other side of sin. There's cynicism, and you don't have to be vulnerable over here when you're cynical. But when you are vulnerable before God, before other people, that is where you can fully embrace and connect with the Lord. But it's risky. And thanks be to God that he pulls us, invites us out of cynicism. And that's, I feel myself constantly, this pattern of okay, do the things. And then Jesus is like, hey, why are you doing it? Don't lose sight of me in the midst of it. And so we have to help each other as a church. Hey, we gotta stay centered on the why, and that's Jesus. Okay, last one. It's just too hard. Jesus says, I'm the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. The people hear Jesus say that, and they start arguing with one another. How can this man give us his flesh to eat? They take him very, very literally, which is, it's okay. There's a misunderstanding there. But let's hear the truth of it. Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise them up at the last day. Remember how this starts? We're reminded that it was the Passover festival. The next time we read about the Passover, what's happening? Jesus is dying on the cross. It's the new deliverance that's coming. And we know in the other Gospels, the Last Supper meal, where Jesus says, this bread is my body, this blood, this wine is my blood, and invites them to partake in it. As if to say this, to fully embrace me, you got to totally take me in on the inside, because I want to transform you and bring new life from the inside out. This is the new delivery. It's not going to be manna that just fills you. It's going to be me, the gift of myself. But the people struggle with this. They're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So much so that in verse 60 it says, on hearing it, many of Jesus' disciples said, this is a hard teaching. Who can accept it? And then in verse 66, from this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed Jesus. When it describes disciples, it's not just the 12. There's this big group of people who are saying, hey, I want to follow you. And upon hearing this teaching, that's just too hard for, Jesus, this is just too much. You're the center of, you're saying you're the salvation, you're the new Passover meal? That's just too hard to accept. And people leave. But I want you to hear what happens in the next two verses, and this is how we'll conclude. Jesus then turns to the 12 apostles. And he asks them this question. You don't want to leave too, do you? It's just sad. You can just hear Jesus' heart kind of breaking. The disciples, it's too hard of a teaching. All these people leave. He turns to the 12. Are you going to go too? And listen to Simon Peter's response. He answered him. He said, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. We have come to believe and to know that you are the Holy One of God. Here's the thing. If you know anything about Peter's story, all 6 of these obstacles, Peter, we could talk about all day. Peter, having those, struggling with those all day. It's not a matter of, if you hear all these obstacles, the 6 ones you walked in, you're like, yep, me too, me too, me too. You're like, is there any hope for me fully embracing Jesus? But hear what Peter says. In the midst of all the wrestling that Peter does and has, he knows he can't get away from Jesus. There is something about Jesus that he's like, he's tasted of him. He's truly come to see and to know who Jesus is. He's experienced the life that Jesus brings. And he's like, in the midst of the cynicism, in the midst of the fear, the doubt, all those things, where else can I go? I know I can't find anything better. I know I can't find anyone who can satisfy me like you, Jesus. Where else can we go? I'm going to invite the worship band up for a closing song. And I think I'll just say this too. Every single one of those obstacles, I can so easily relate to them. And I know they've kept me, and they keep me at times from fully embracing Jesus, from trusting full hope in him. But in the midst of my stretching that I've experienced in my life, I've had times where I feel like I'm just on the edge of faith, barely hanging on. And I know what it's like to say what Peter said. To be like, yeah, this is hard. The things you ask us to do, Jesus, is hard. Love your enemies, forgive people, be vulnerable, surrender when I just want to control. Where else can I go, though? I know, Jesus, that you have the words of eternal life, and I've tasted of it. I can't go anywhere else. And my hope is, if you're like, I don't know if I've tasted of that before. I don't know if I've experienced that life. I'd invite you, the invitation all throughout the Gospels, really through all of Scriptures, come and see. You're invited. But also, for those of us who are on the journey and we keep tripping over these obstacles, there's an invitation to come and see. Come to Jesus. Respond to him. He has the words of eternal life. May we come to believe and to know that he is the Holy One of God. Would you stand? And as we pray and sing, let's sing in response to Jesus and who he is.